Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Junia Doan's The Spark. I'm Junia Doan, and thank you for joining us. Today, I will be speaking with Chance Leonard, Hall of Fame inducted wrestler and producer of his upcoming documentary, The Price of Legacy, Wrestling with a Dynasty. Welcome, Chance. Chance, I'm really delighted to interview you through the options of Zoom. How did you become interested in wrestling?
Well, first and foremost, thank you, Junia, for having me be part of your program today. I'm certainly a fan and appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I first became interested in the sport of wrestling out of the womb. I was born into a wrestling family, and being around the sport at a very early age really allowed me to grow a love for it, despite not knowing how truly to participate in it, and not knowing all of the moves or what the rules of wrestling actually were at the time of growing up. But I think it grew more first and foremost by having some success. But then for me, what really kept me involved for a lengthy period of time in the sport was just the amount of practice and the amount of perseverance and overcoming and persistence that the sport requires. And that created a love for the grind.
Tell us something about Perry, Oklahoma, and the fact that your father was a coach of that outstanding team.
Absolutely. Well, the wrestling program in Perry, Oklahoma is like no other. First and foremost, it's almost 100 years old. So a century of time has passed that this program has been a part of the sport. It was established in 1922 in the small town of Perry, Oklahoma. And that was only about 29 years after the actual land run took place in Oklahoma. And so growing up in that program, it's generational in the sense that it's passed down from generation to generation. So everybody that participates in the sport usually has somebody that's been associated, either having their father as being a coach, having a brother that participated in the sport, having an uncle or grandfather that is some way connected to the program.
So you never felt pressure. It's just what the family and the town did.
Actually, I would say there is two elements of that. Yes, it's what the town, commits to for the last 100 years. It's the sport of choice. And Perry wrestling is considered, and Perry, Oklahoma is considered the wrestling capital of the world because of its accomplishments. But there is a tremendous amount of pressure involved with being a student athlete there because of the rich tradition, because of the past accomplishments that people have achieved along the way, and keeping that tradition and that legacy alive, especially with our youth athletes that are at a young age. There is a tremendous amount of pressure because you're not just wrestling against an opponent, but you're also wrestling against history.
The young man, the 60-year-old I talked to about why he's in the wrestling program in preparation for this, said one of the things he liked about it is in the sense that it was solo. It was his mistake or his good moves and not so much of the team. Whereas in the film and so forth, you experienced and the town experiences more do your part on the team.
Absolutely. Wrestling is a very individualistic sport. In order for the team, though, to prevail, you have to do your job and take care of your responsibilities as an individual wrestler on the team. So in most states, there's 14 weights. And so if you are part of the team and you wrestle either in a dual meet or in a tournament, in order for points to be scored, you have to win. And so most wrestlers or most people are drawn to the sport because of that individual element. You own it. You own the successes and you own the mistakes as well. And there's nobody else that can come out and take your place if you get injured. And so there are people that have that type of drive and attitude that do want to get involved in the sport of wrestling.
This young man was commenting that in each of the three levels where you can take on the opponent, if I understood it correctly, there are many, many moves, but usually people learn to concentrate on a few. What few worked for you?
Well, I would tell you that anybody that gets involved in the sport, just even learning from the beginning, is that there's 3 periods in wrestling. And so you usually are wrestling on your feet. So if you can actually take your opponent down to score points, if you can start the second period in the bottom position and get an escape or reversal, and when you start the third period, if you can ride, you can win. And so the sport has really, really progressed over the last 10 to 15 years from the position of standing and being on your feet and utilizing takedowns. So the riding component is not as popular these days. It's not as much action filled, but there's a lot of technique that gets utilized from the standing position. When you get on top, it's more of a physical, I'm going to turn you to your back and pin you. And so those are, I think, where most wrestlers learn to be great in all 3 phases of wrestling.
What kind of exercises do you have to do to make your body available at that level of response?
Wrestling requires a tremendous amount of, besides perseverance, the shape that is kind of 2 elements. Being in shape to go 6 minutes full speed requires a lot of road work. There's also a lot of short-term muscle usage that is, quick fire. You got to be faster than your opponent. You got to move them out of position. And so it's not like a football game where each play lasts about 4 or 5 seconds. This is a sport that demands a tremendous amount of shape, a tremendous amount of strength. So a lot of time on the road, a lot of time on the bike, a lot of time lifting weights, and a lot of time doing technical work in practice and pushing your body to be able to keep up with the demands of a full 6-minute match.
Now, in the film, Mr. Hodges, the famous Mr. Hodges, is photographing using his hands to crumple a newspaper from being flat as a way to strengthen his fingers. And there's a wonderful discussion of his that he could lay his opponent down just by going up their arm and also leaving black and blue marks. And I thought, is that a vital part of wrestling, to strong hands?
Absolutely. There will never be another Danny Hodge. So Danny Hodge, being from Perry, Oklahoma, was a 2-time Olympian, an Olympic silver medalist, and a 3-time undefeated national champion at the University of Oklahoma. He also was a state champion at Perry High School. Danny is known for his physical prowess and his complete domination of his opponents. For instance, he was never taken down from the standing position in his collegiate career and is the only amateur wrestler ever to be on the cover of Sports Illustrated. But his prowess was truly, and legacy was truly cemented in the fact that his strength was, dominant. And there's nobody, even the strongest wrestlers that he competed against, didn't have anything, close. And wrestling is a very, very physical sport. It requires a lot of what we call hand fighting in the sport. It requires a lot of, tie-ups that allow you to move your opponent out of position. And so he built his strength. Part of it was certainly natural. He was gifted in that way. But secondly, he was very, very determined to be able to build his strength through, as I said, smashing these, this paper together over and over and over again. And so that led to just a dominating strength.
I noticed that there are, well, I was told, not that I noticed, 14 different weight classes that you can compete on, and people try to diet a few days before so they can get in the lower class and so forth, have strong muscles. But it just seems to me, when I was in college, I learned there are 3: ectomorph, mesomorph, and something. But people like me who are a little thin don't really do so well in wrestling, tall and thin. You have to be sort of more squat and rest and muscular. Is more of an advantage. Do you agree?
I don't, actually. The sport of wrestling provides opportunities to young boys and girls that no other sport can provide, because there are different weight classes, and because we know that there are many different body types. Everybody can compete in the sport of wrestling. And so, even some of the for instance, my friend John Smith is a 6-time world and Olympic champion, and arguably the greatest wrestler in our nation's history. Was rather tall and lanky, but he was very, very quick, and he didn't concentrate on big muscles. He concentrated on flexibility and strength in certain positions, and that was where the technique came through. And so I would say that anybody and everybody can participate because there are no requirements for size.
My late husband participated in wrestling at Cornell when he was there, although I didn't know him then. But still, it gives what I liked about it, it gives an opportunity to everyone to participate, and what you put in terms of work is reflected often in what happens on the mat, or however you say that. You drew this wonderful documentary. How did you come to do that?
Trying to encapsulate the sport into a 90-minute film is a bit of a challenge. But I think what we need to be able to harness from it is exactly what you explained, is that because the sport demands a higher level of accountability from its athletes, the athletes are going to be able to utilize the traits that they learn through the sport to be successful and carry that on through the rest of their life. The commitment to be able to, just complete the workouts is a very big challenge. But there is an element of losing weight, and then there's an element of cutting weight, and they are two very different things. And they require a tremendous amount of perseverance. They require discipline from pushing away, not only just from the table, but from the intake of fluids until you actually make weight. And so there's a tremendous determination that comes out through the sport. And so I think, knowing what you're getting into and knowing what will come of it, hopefully we'll be able to get more young boys and girls into the sport.
I like that, particularly for now. I found out our 2 high schools here do have wrestling teams, so that's good. And the young man likes his coach, so that's good. And he said he runs track and field long distances in the spring, and he felt that helped him with the wrestling. But he said you have to be he is fairly competitive. What is the role of competitive nature in success in wrestling?
I think it's twofold. I think that, some people are truly born with a competitive nature about them. I was probably one of them. As a matter of fact, and through some of my leadership training, from my postgraduate work, that was one of my number one themes in the Gallup poll is competition. But I think that there's also an element that wrestling draws out of people and builds over time is a love of competition and a drive to constantly be better because of the technique that is required in order to learn and execute all of the moves in a wrestling match. It requires a lot of repetition, which requires a lot of determination. And the competitive side is that this is a very physical sport, and you want to physically dominate your opponent. And in order to truly just score points, you have to move your opponent physically out of position in order to score. And so I think all of that together, it really will develop not only a competitive nature or even stoke the one that young boys and girls have.
How important is the psychological in wrestling for winning?
I think the psychological element of any competition is required. You got to believe that you can win. And so some of that comes from just an internal drive and belief, but a lot of that belief is built over time and built through the physicality of the sport. And, even the first time that you have to lose 2 pounds or 3 pounds in an hour's period of time in order to make weight builds a psychological advantage and determination. And when you repetitively do that, I think that helps over time. And so, I think the psychological side of it is required. You got to know that you can win, but most importantly, I think you got to know that you've put in the work in order to win.
Do you age out of wrestling?
Well, I think yes. It's because of the physicality of the sport. Most of the international and Olympic wrestlers who compete post-collegiately are probably make it somewhere between 24 to age 32. One of the most decorated wrestlers in American wrestling history is Bruce Baumgartner, and he went to 4 different Olympics and wrestled, almost up into his 40s. But for the most part, since there's no, real money that
Yeah.
done on a consistent basis after college, a lot of athletes, end after they try to reach their dream of winning a NCAA championship or an Olympic gold medal.
I've heard in the past that some of the professional wrestling is fake. Can you tell whether it's fake or not, you personally?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
You
I think the
can.
WWE it's a great show. And there's certainly a lot of physical, elements to it. These people are great athletes, but once you set these two side by side, there's no comparison. The sport of wrestling is doing extremely well with regard to creating new events and new competitions and spotlight duels through our RTC programs that help funnel athletes after their collegiate programs directly to the international Olympic styles. And so that's truly growing. And we've had a lot of athletes that are being paid for their trade, which is fantastic for the sport.
Did you encourage your children to go into wrestling?
I did.
How did you do it?
Probably a little bit, too hard, too early. But I've pulled back away from that. I just, number one, started bringing them to the wrestling room, get them acclimated to the room and watching their friends participate in the sport and, just allowing them to, understand the sport and learn from the sport and understand what it's going to give you. And so they are doing pretty well. I'd like to see them be able to do it more full time, but at the same time, kids need to participate in other sports as well.
In the film, what did you leave out? I've seen the film, it's wonderful, people should see it, but what did you leave out?
I would say, the enemy of good is great. And I know every millisecond of my film. And there's so many things that I would like to continue adding to the final rendering, so to speak. But the one thing that I would say, if I had to be able to do it over again or be able to add a little bit more, I would probably show maybe a little bit more of the grind, as I spoke about a little earlier. And then a little bit more build up to how the film ends. And during the 2016-17 season, the Perry Wrestling program was at a point where one of the three major streaks that it owns was in serious jeopardy. And this streak is that started in 1961. The Perry Wrestling program has never gone more than 2 years without winning a state title. And during the 2016-17 season, that streak was on the line. And so maybe a little bit more build up to the drama that took place behind the scenes in order to see if that team was going to prevail.
And you yourself, when you were wrestling, you had a major injury just before the team was going to state. Tell us about that. How did that injury happen, and how did it affect you?
Well, growing up, as I say, and starting the sport at 3 or 4 years old, I had very specific goals, and when I made the high school team as a freshman, one of my goals was to be a 4-time state champion in the state of Oklahoma. There were only 3 people that had done it previously, and one of them was from Perry, Oklahoma. And during one of the qualifying tournaments to make it to the state tournament, it's called the regional tournament, I was injured in a mat when I lifted my opponent off the mat. I fractured a bone in my spine and immediately fell to the mat and wasn't able to get up. And unfortunately, that ended my opportunity to become a 4-time state champion. And that injury impacted the rest of my high school and collegiate career, and certainly has been with me today after 4 spine surgeries so far. But that injury has been while it's been very painful to endure all of these years, it's been very useful. It kept me very humble, and knowing that I need to be careful with it, but also knowing that I can overcome despite how bad my body feels or the surgery that is utilized to try to correct the issues. It certainly has served me well.
But for someone who had such specific goals, how did you deal with that loss of opportunity?
It was devastating. I won't lie about it. I still remember the very match where it happened. I remember the mat. I remember where I was on the mat. I remember who my opponent was. And it allowed me to reassess what I needed to do and how I needed to take care of my body in order to be able to achieve the goals that I had still set. So, that's the great thing about wrestling. Even if you lose a match or you have an injury like I did, and an injury default and not achieve a goal, there's always the next match for the most part. And getting back up and going back to work, it's as we know, it's a very blue collar sport. You don't need much to get started, but I think the more coming back to the activities and being in the wrestling room and being around my teammates and stuff helped me to achieve, even if it wasn't the ultimate goal that I wanted.
Looking back, was there some little exercise you could have done more of that would have protected your back? Or was it the angle that you lift him, or his weight, or what? I mean, you're a strong guy. What do you think triggered that you could have remediated if you were smarter and worked differently earlier?
Well, smarter probably would help. But, at the time, I think this was a God-ordained injury that he knew was going to take place. I don't think that I didn't do anything technique-wise that was incorrect. It was just an injury at the the right place and the right time, and it happened. And as I say, I've been dealing with it ever since.
I bet you put that competitive goal direction, I mean, a goal setting in a different direction. Did you?
Absolutely. As I say, adapting the goals is always an opportunity. When you have a setback, reassess the situation, what needs to take place next, and then reestablish a new goal. And so those really didn't change much from there. But where I think I've really been able to utilize what I learned in the sport is my post-wrestling career and my professional career. It's still what the most important things are: commitment and perseverance and work ethic. Those three things that you can take from the sport of wrestling will truly be advantageous to you in a professional career.
That's a great deal to learn. Anyway, thank you very much, Chance. I'd like to say something about wrestling, what I learned from Chance and actually his experience. That in his case, he set very high and early in his life those goals. And maybe people did or didn't on their way through. But the byproduct of this inclusive sport, which has 14 different weight levels, which is very impressive to me, is that if you stay with it, you'll get into preparation, you get into commitment, you get into follow through, you get off the mat and do it again, maybe differently. And that kind of discipline and builds character that carries you throughout your life, dad, professional, husband, whatever you get involved with. And it's wonderful that you can earn that experience early in life. So thank you for tuning in, and see you next time. Do something kind for someone you know and someone you don't know, and I'll see you next time.
To contact Junia, send her an email at juniadonsthespark@gmail.com. For more information, program schedules, and news about future guests, go to www.juniadonthespark.com. Thank you for joining us. See you next time on Junia Doan's The Spark.
Local productions seen on Delta College Public Media are made possible with support from viewers like you. Thank you.